20 years, the video game industry has really been trying to increase the ways that they can monetize existing games. Whether that be through Oblivion Horse Armor DLC, microtransactions, loot boxes, season passes. It's not just enough to sell a game anymore. There's all this extra stuff that you've got to sell with it. In fact, this additional monetization has become so normalized in current year video games that it is considered extremely abnormal when a game does not have any of this stuff built onto its content roadmap. However, in the past year, there has been a new form of monetization that has been creeping into major releases that I find particularly fascinating. This new form of monetization is charging extra for a pre-release date access to the game, prior to the game's general availability to the general public at its regular MSRP. In fact, this trend is just so new that there's no real industry standardized term for just talking about this yet. To be honest, I hate calling this early access because early access has a very specific, obviously different definition from what they're doing here. Like early access, the whole point is that you're giving the developer money while the game is in development and you have access to the game while it is actively being built. Whereas this, the game is ostensibly content complete, or at least it should be, so you're just paying for a little bit earlier access to something that is effectively already done. I would personally like to call this trend early release. It just has like a nice ring to it and completely separates it from early access entirely. So the way that I would personally define early release is that a developer asks for more money on top of the standard MSRP of a game in order for the consumer to access the game a couple of days before the street date that everybody else, the general public, can access it. Sometimes this early release can come in the form of like a deluxe package that comes with a bunch of other DLCs, sometimes just a standalone surcharge. Now, this may be a bit of a hot take, but in my opinion, I actually think that early releases are some of the most like ethical and fair ways that the video game industry has found to additionally monetize their games since the introduction of DLC itself. Early releases don't change the structure of a game like things like loot boxes, microtransactions, or season passes do, so that means you don't have to worry about any of that psychological stuff going on. Really, the only shady thing about early releases is it really pushing fear of missing out even more than games currently already do. That, well, I can't possibly get spoiled on this game, so I gotta fork up extra so I don't get story spoilers showing up in my social media feed timeline. At least for me, I really cannot fundamentally hate the concept of early releases since it is a fair transaction, in my opinion, that you pay extra money up front to get early access for the game. It is a mutual, both ways understanding of an exchange of goods and services. I mean, compared to what the video game industry has done in the past with things like that 2016-2017 era, where they were just shoving loot boxes into every single game, even single-player ones for some reason. Like, early releases are nothing in comparison to that. One thing I found particularly interesting in thinking about it is that early release games really incentivize people to go digital with their game releases. All of the early release versions of games that I have seen are only for the digital versions, and that obviously makes sense. It's much easier to control the early release of a digital product compared to a physical one. Now, I have been saying a lot of nice things about early releases and how fair and ethical they are and blah, 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 blah. But that's really only on paper, because there is still one major aspect of game development culture that basically makes the whole early release thing like a non-starter for 99% of games and takes it from a great idea to entirely stupid and do not fall for this. See, for over a decade at this point, and possibly closer to 2, major games have had this problem of just not shipping their games finished, that even with day one patches. so many games just launch with inherent performance problems and bugs that need many more weeks or months of patching in order to fix. And so this system often punishes people who are the biggest fans of a game, who buy the game on day one, because they are playing the objectively worst version of the game, that it will be in the worst state that it will be, compared to somebody who will buy the game on a sale months or years down the road, with a fully patched version of the game. So one would think, with the introduction of the early release system, that this would truly and finally, once and for all, fix this sort of bad behavior from developers. That the incentive of increased revenue from selling the game a couple days earlier for premium buyers would give developers a reason to finally optimize their games for release for the general public, since there is a big contingent of premium players paying extra for a game on its early release. But what actually seems to be happening in practice is that it's not fixing any of the development timeline that allows for bad, buggy games on day one to exist. Rather, it has arguably made the system worse. So you get this interesting phenomenon where consumers are paying more for an earlier access to the game, but nothing has fundamentally changed. The developers are still developing day one patches for their games, but not day one for the early release like you would think that they do. No, they're making day one patches for the MSRP release of a game. This could be most noticeably seen with Star Wars Outlaws. See, Outlaws had this weird problem on the early release versions of PS5 where there were progression blocking bugs, where you could not advance the games at certain point. And so what Ubisoft suggested to people was, hey, we're going to patch the game, but also you need to restart your save file over. Which is an absolutely and totally garbage way to treat your earliest and most hardcore buyers, Ubisoft. So in actuality, the day one experience buyers had a much better experience than the pre-release buyers, because not only did they get a game that did not block your save progression, but it was also cheaper. And so this is fundamentally the reason why I say that early releases you cannot trust for 99% of game developers. Because 99% of them have this, oh, we'll patch it later after the game's already come out kind of culture built in. That I really only think there are certain companies out there that you can fully trust that the game is going to be polished and complete by the time that it gets into the hands of the general consumer, that it makes this feature even worth it. Now, inevitably, I feel like I am definitely going to fall for the early release upcharge at some point in the future. Some big game will come out, and I have to play it as soon as it comes out, and I'll pay the extra money to get it. If there's one game that I definitely know I am going to have to get the early release of and pay extra for, it's Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. Listen, man, the 7 Remake game is very personally important to me. I think they have fantastic gameplay, and the story is just so incredible. And I can't risk having it spoiled for me, dude, by some randos on social media, like, posting the whole game. Especially if they do, like, early game access, like, 5 days before instead of, like, 2 or 3. If you no-life it, you could complete a JRPG on like a regular playthrough in 5 days. Now, one company I'm really particularly interested in how they handle early releases is Nintendo. Like, yes, I know that we might not see them do it for a while because Nintendo just tends to be behind on the whole digital distribution thing, but just early release and how it fundamentally works on the back end seems like such a simple change that I don't think it would be that crazy that Nintendo could do something like that, like, by next year. But I could also see the case, with how particular and odd Nintendo is, that they would just be, like, extremely caring about the day one experience, that everybody gets access to the game at the same time, and they want that experience to be shared among the entire player base. So no matter how much more people are willing to pay for an early release of a big Nintendo first-party game, that they could just decide not to do it for arbitrary reasons. But anyways, guys, that's it for the video. Leave a like if you like this video. Leave a comment down below. What do you think about early releases for games? Do you think that they're cool? Do you think that they're stupid? Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this coming from this channel. Hit up my Patreon down below if you want to give me some of that cash money. Incentivize me to make more videos like this in the future. Anyways, that's it, and have a good day.